Introducing Anna Belak, Director of Cybersecurity Strategy at Sysdig. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, where are you in the world at the moment?
I am just outside Boston in Concord, Massachusetts.
Nice. Is that HQ for you? Are you home office today?
The company that I work for is headquartered in San Francisco, like all the other cool Silicon Valley companies. But we've been a global remote company since actually before COVID.
Yeah.
So lots of us are all over the place, and I've been in the Boston area for almost 10 years, I think. Yeah.
Okay. What spurred that move to Boston?
I actually just love Boston. This is going to sound exactly on brand for all the people who live on the East Coast, but I enjoy the like in your face, frank, like no holds barred attitude of it all. I
Nice.
used to live in the Midwest. Like I went to grad school at the University of Michigan, and everyone there is like very sweet and polite and nice. And that's just not who I am. Like I'm kind of an in your face person.
Love it. Well,
Yeah.
look, you're going to be perfect guest for a podcast then. So no, I just know that Boston's been a real hub for cybersecurity, and a lot of particularly Israeli founders I've interviewed, they've been relocating to Boston and or New York. So that's just why I asked. But look, Anna, with all my guests, I really like to just roll back to where it all began and how you got into the industry. But I know for you, I want to ask first of all about your PhD, because that was a pretty
Uh,
cool what you did.
it's a weird one, yeah. So I thought all my life that I wanted to be a scientist, largely because I just enjoyed figuring stuff out. I was also influenced by my mom, who was a scientist, so there was some bias, of course. But like you test on different kind of classes in school and different like careers people have. And that always seemed like a really cool thing to do. So I committed to that like full on. I went to school to get a bachelor's degree in physics, and then I started my PhD. By the way, to be fair, I finished my bachelor's degree in 2008, which was like the worst time to get an entry level job. It may be the second worst time after right now, actually. So going to grad school was like the play if you didn't want to just starve. And I was like, whatever, I'll just go to school and then I'll become a professor. So after 6 years of PhDing, I was done. I was like, I can't do this for the rest of my life. Now, I don't have any regrets because my work was really cool. I actually started out doing experiments on solar cells.
Yeah.
So like all this photovoltaic research that's like becoming like quite mainstream now was very interesting. The problem with being like the scientist is discovering this stuff is you don't really get that like joy of seeing it become real. You're just like doing the same painful experiment every single day and like failing at it, and then you're doing it slightly differently, and then after like 200 days you're just like, oh my god, kill me, like I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So I quit the experimental thing and I switched to theory. So theory is like computational modeling where you're trying to do like all kinds of crazy math and physics calculations to figure out like what should happen. And I did that actually also on electronic materials and then super alloys, which are made used for jet engines.
Hmm.
So that was pretty cool, especially soul crushing, because you kind of like run some jobs at a supercomputer and you can like go and have coffee while they run, and then you like analyze data and then repeat. So it's less soul crushing. But turnout still did not be for me. So I actually decided after I finished the PhD that I was going to go into something that is much more fast, like still technical and complex, but much more fast paced. And basically everyone was like, well, you should be a software engineer or like something in IT. And I hate writing code. I actually wrote code for my PhD because I had to create a whole new method for calculating stuff. But I hate writing code. Like I can't sleep. I cannot stop thinking about the code.
Yep.
So that wasn't going to be it. And then like I basically just applied for jobs, right? Like I went on the internet. I was like, okay, I'm gonna apply for all the jobs ever because I don't like know what I want to do. And I got interviewed by Gartner, which for anyone who's not familiar is like an IT research and advisory firm. If you're familiar with McKinsey, it's kind of like that, but McKinsey will do like specific projects for people, and Gartner is more proactive. So they do whatever they think is important, and then you call them and ask questions and answer them. And so the thing about that is like Gartner usually employs very experienced people who have been doing something for like 30 years so they can go explain to other people how it should be done. But when there are emerging trends, like if there's some new technology coming on the market, they will actually employ younger people because they're kind of like, well, no one knows this, so I may as well like pay less money for talent, first of all. And second of all, have like a fresh, open mind that somebody doesn't necessarily have a bias for like how things used to be. So like they did that with social media 20 years ago, and then they did it with cloud and containerization, which is when I joined.
Nice. How long was you at Gartner for?
I was there for 6 years. So I started out in infrastructure and operations. So I covered like DevOps, Kubernetes, like OpenShift, like all these things. And then I joined the security team after 3 years in INO and spent 3 more years in the security operations team.
Time flies when you just put it like that. What was when you was at Gartner, what would you say was the most exciting part?
Oh, good question.
The main wise.
Gartner's a really cool job. So one of the coolest things is if you make friends easily, you can get exposed to like every domain at Gartner. Like you get a really good bird's eye view of the entire industry, which is, I don't think there's anywhere else you can really do that. And you don't realize that until you leave, by the way. Like since Gartner was my first job, I didn't really have much perspective. And so I learned all this stuff and how it interconnects. And then I joined a vendor and now I'm like, wow, most people really have no idea what goes on outside their domain because they're too busy working like on their actual job. So that's a really cool thing you get, I think, at Gartner. The most fun topics to cover, I think, are the kind of intersections that are emerging, right? So when you have, so we got DevOps, right? And DevOps is all like, oh, let's ship software faster. That's great. And then you go, oh, wait, well, how do we secure that? Right. So I think those intersections where we kind of like decided this is the right way to ship software and everyone agrees. And then we're like, what about security? And everyone's like, oh, I don't know. Like that sounds uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So those moments of tension that appear when new technology emerges and tries to like fit itself into our old and existing processes and biases are really interesting because you're really dealing with human psychology more than anything else. That if you don't understand how the technology works, you can't actually say anything or do anything about it. So it requires this intersection of skill, of like soft skills and hard skills. Like you have to know the tech, you have to understand what's going on and why. And then you have to understand like the perspectives of the people that are being involved and affected by this. Like why a developer doesn't want to do things a certain way, or like why an operations engineer is like mad at developers all the time. And so those are super interesting. It's really hard to fix those problems, by the way, but like very interesting to think about them.
Yeah, a lot of people when they're trying to get into the industry, I think that's one of the biggest problems for them is trying to work out which domain or what area of security they're most interested in or what they like doing. So it's really interesting that Gartner gave you a lot of exposure, and you're not the only person as well. I spoke to Augusto Barros. He's at Synchronics. Do you know him?
He's a very good friend of mine. Yes, he's like one of the mentors that taught me everything I know about security.
Great guy, yeah. So for anyone that's potentially open to getting into the industry, you should definitely check out Gartner then, because some good thoroughbreds come out of there. So yeah, after Gartner, then did you join Sysdig? Was that the next step?
Yeah, and I mean this is like almost a joke, but it's true. A lot of people who spend some time at Gartner and decide to leave. Some people don't leave, by the way. They'll stay there for 25 years or whatever. It's a really, really cool job. They will go to their favorite vendor, which is funny because you're not supposed to have a favorite vendor, right? Because you're supposed to be objective. But you get so much exposure to all the different vendors and end users who are like telling you things about the products they're using that you get a very good sense for like which companies have like a crap culture, right? Or which companies have like a really strong technical team. So you sort of get all this insider information. And then it's pretty easy to go and like pick the company that you think will be the coolest to work for and just go there. Or the one that has the highest upside, or whatever you're optimizing for, right? So I really cared about company culture, and Sysdig is pretty well known for having a really great company culture. So my kind of top 3 were I wanted a strong leadership team that had, like, it wasn't their first company because I'm not that brave. I wanted a really strong company culture so people like weren't jerks basically, but that they were there to get work done, that they weren't like just writing some fraud wave or whatever, and that the product was A, like solid technically, and B, solving some modern problems. So I didn't want to work on like mainframes or some other stuff that's like still necessary but not that exciting. And Sysdig was kind of that company. Like there weren't too many that I considered actually.
So who are Sysdig for the audience?
With Sysdig, yeah. So if you don't know, which you should, Sysdig is a cloud and container security company. We are one of the leading CNAPPs, if you know what that is. If you read lots of Gartner documents, you should. CNAPP stands for Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. So this is a security tool suite that is designed to protect applications that are built in and for the cloud. And we do that all the way from like configuration assessment and vulnerability assessment through to threat detection and incident response.
I will put the careers URL in the show notes as well for anyone that's also interested in that. So your role specifically at Sysdig, when you joined to now what you're doing now, how's it evolved and what are you up to specifically?
Yes, so my role hasn't changed too much. I kind of joined as an individual contributor, and now I manage a small team. So that's the one evolution. As I'm called the director of cybersecurity strategy, which is a little nebulous, but what this means is when you work for a vendor that's in an emerging market, there's a very strong need to do kind of awareness marketing, if you will, right? And awareness marketing sounds like putting things on billboards so people know you exist. And this is sort of like that, but in a way, it's very hard to do this for a technology that no one really understands, right? So so there's one moment of like people don't actually know what's happening. Like you might not know what Kubernetes is, right? Or you might not know how to secure Kubernetes. And then there are people who know what's happening and they're trying to do it, but they really don't know how. So in the how to do it, if you're lucky, you actually go to Gartner or like a firm like that, and you say, hey, well, these people sit there and they do research on how new stuff should happen. So I'm going to call them and ask. If you aren't engaged with Gartner because, I don't know, it's expensive or whatever reason, you kind of are just Googling like for information, or you're like asking your friends, you're going to like communities and trying to get this input. And honestly, like there's not necessarily that much good content available on anything emerging because no one knows. So what my team does is we try to help people along in their journey. Like we want people to know who Sysdig is because we are a player in the space, obviously. But before even that, we want people to know like, what is going on? Like, what are the problems of the day in containers or in cloud or in Kubernetes or in DevOps, all these things, right? How do our most mature customers solve them, right? I have relationships with a bunch of like financial companies who have been doing this for, I don't know, more than a decade. And so I can take kind of lessons we've learned from them and pass those on. I mean, without saying who they are or what exactly they did, right? But I can give like best practices kind of advice to people who are just getting started. Because we have customers across the board. We have like people who are just getting into cloud in the past 3 years, and people have been in cloud for like, it's been almost 20 years now. Oh my God. Yeah. So yeah, we try to be like that knowledge transfer kind of like office of we're just here to help you understand. And then we hope that that builds our brand as a company that is smart and helpful and wants to be a partner with you. And then we do help our marketing and sales counterparts because their job is to, of course, like spread the good word of Sysdig and actually make money. But we intentionally kind of stay a little bit distance from them because we don't want to be perceived as selling the product because we're not really. But hopefully you decide that we're cool and then buy our product later, obviously.
Before we dive into the content, I know that you've produced a report recently that has a lot of really interesting data. And you mentioned 20 years and then obviously last 3 years, how has it evolved, particularly the cloud security space? Like, what have you seen? Like, any real evolution that you think, wow?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny to think it's been 20 years. So that is actually another thing that my team does is we work very closely with the threat research team. And what they do is they literally uncover like new threats, and then they actually build the content into detection engineering for the product, right? So when they find like some new campaign, malicious campaign, they will create rules and detections, machine learning, whatever, to help our customers detect it. And then what we do is we try to tell a greater story. Like, okay, what are we seeing over the course of this year or several years or whatever? So for a while, we didn't actually see any threats in cloud. Like people did stuff in cloud for, it was since like 2005 or something, right? And security was like, oh, maybe it should be secure. And then for a while, like, oh, it's secure by default because the cloud providers are very good at it. And then it's like, oh, the cloud providers are really bad at it. Like this vulnerability, whatever. So we went through all these like waves of we're not really sure, but there wasn't like a big event that everyone noticed until probably the Capital One breach, which now has also been a while, right? Like almost 10 years ago. Oh my God. And so that the Capital One breach was cool because, cool. It was interesting because it was this very specific tension between like, is it the cloud provider's fault or the customer's fault? And it was an incident threat situation, so it was very complex. And after that, we started really seriously like expecting attacks to come in. And so you're still kind of dealing with mostly with APTs, right? Because like the first thing that happens is APTs go for the forward-leading companies, which, by the way, one of the things we saw in our threat report is like the number one target of attacks is financial services, right? Obviously, because they're usually the most advanced. And then we saw the sea of like crypto miners and other like generic fraud, right? So the first real like cloud threat or cloud attack that everybody started to see was crypto miners. So probably for 5+ years now, we see just tons of crypto miners everywhere. And that's like, okay, it's not that interesting because it's just money, right? Like you're paying a higher bill. They're fairly easy to detect if you have tools in place. And the damage is not that substantial usually, although some of those bills have come to like $500,000 a year extra money that you should cough up. Like, anyway. what's interesting though is we now see more and more creative ways of people abusing crypto mining, like the crypto mining on free tier accounts, right? So like they'll get free tier accounts in GitHub or GitLab and all these kind of services. They're starting to crypto mine on like less frequently used AWS services. So like they'll find all the services that aren't that popular, expecting people to not monitor them as much, and they'll start mining on those. So they're getting more and more creative, right? And then this year probably was the first year where we started seeing sort of more interesting attacks, right? So now we're seeing kind of a lot of attempts at account compromise, right? Because if you can get credentials, you can do things with those credentials and maybe find more credentials. And so this approach of like, if I can find any credential in cloud and then just like find a way to pivot, I might be onto, well, if nothing else, lots of servers to crypto mine on, right? So one key takeaway that's really mind-blowing that probably you also noticed is that the amount of time it takes to execute one of these attacks is super short, right? So there is a huge amount of automation that's going into this. And what you end up with is essentially a 10-minute time span. So from when your existence is discovered, like they're scanning, the internet or whatever, they're looking for you, or they find a credential that belongs to your company somewhere on the dark web, to the moment that you experience impact, right? So that's malware that's been dropped onto you, or like data has been exfiltrated from you. It takes 10 minutes, like only 10 minutes. And again, that's average, right? So you'll have some that are longer, but you have some that are shorter, right? It's just like, wow. One of the reasons we think is actually like it's this trade-off, right? Like it's a huge benefit of cloud that everything is pretty uniform, right? So like your CSP of choice has a set of APIs that are exposed, and they're always the same and they're well documented. So you can go look up how they work, how to interact with them, and everything about them. And so that information is also available to attackers, right? So before, when you had your like crazy bespoke data center configuration that you built from scratch over dozens of years, where like half the people that put it together are no longer there, somebody would get into your environment, like I said, they breach your perimeter, and now they have to figure out like this tangled mess of nonsense and see where they can get the valuable, data from. In cloud, like everyone has the same infrastructure, basically, like it all looks the same. So the attackers can kind of practice their attacks ahead of time on their own like account that they just paid for or stole, whatever. And they can create these fairly complex automations that actually, because they know, well, they can enumerate this thing, enumerate that thing, right? It's all known ahead of time. So it makes it much easier to do reconnaissance, for example. You can just like fire up a bunch of scripts and there you are.
How many like APTs are you guys tracking at the moment? Have you got sort of is there a certain number, or is it, I'm guessing it's growing? Is it decreasing? I imagine it's going up, or
yeah. So it's really hard to tell, actually. Then I don't know how many we're tracking. If I had to guess, I would say it's on the order of like half dozen to a dozen. But it's really hard to attribute, right? So there's this another interesting moment about like IT evolution, that like it's good that we got open source and that it's so popular now. But like the malicious guys are also into open source. Like you can get open source malware, you can get open source, like you name it, scripts for whatever. So what happens is they develop some kind of attack pattern or some kind of, automation for reconnaissance in cloud provider of choice, right? And they just post it on GitHub or online, like for people to download and use. So what you used to do is you would attribute based on like the kinds of tactics or the specific kinds of scripts or whatever that you saw the APT use. And now we just can't tell because they're sharing all their stuff. So like a lot of different APTs could look like each other, or a lot of like script kiddies, like people who are not necessarily advanced persistent threats, who are just like random people on the internet screwing around, can download these tools and use them, right? So anyway, it's becoming much harder to attribute. There's still things you can use to tell, right? Sometimes the language gives them away, like people have comments in like Indonesian or whatever, and you're like, okay, well, it's probably they're not Russians because they're Indonesian, right? So we do use things like that. But yeah, it's kind of a dark art. Like the whole attribution is very complex.
What was the difference between a recon and a discovery? Because when I was reading the threat report, I did notice that was in there. So the difference between a recon and a discovery. So is the recon actually, when you're alerted, you've still got time, but if you're then discovering, you're sort of screwed?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of our TLDR, right? So recon can mean, I guess, a lot of different things, but recon is basically the attacker trying to figure out what is out there. Right. Some recon actions will just be that, like, they may be using like Shodan or something. Like they're just trying to figure out what endpoints are accessible, right? And so you may not even know, like that endpoint may have gotten pinged or something. Like you might not never know that they're looking for you. And so the problem with that is it's very difficult to alert on recon. I mean, you can, but it'd be very noisy because most of recon just looks normal, like normal activity, right? The discovery phase means they've essentially chosen you as a target, and now they are trying to figure out what they can do to you. So at that point, like they have consciously begun to execute the attack against you. And so, like, obviously an alert at some point is better than an alert never. But ideally you figure out, you can catch some of the recon activity somehow so that you know that something's coming. And then by the time you see the discovery activity, you're kind of like already doing something. Even if it's just like, hopefully it's some automatic response, but maybe it's just increased like attention that you're paying to certain systems because you see some weirdness.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the further down the kill chain you go, right, the worse it gets, basically. But the kind of our thought process in general, and this is something we're talking about now, is you essentially, because you have 10 minutes, what we suggest you be able to do is you catch all the signals that are relevant within 5 seconds, right? So if you have a 5 second to second resolution for detection of signals, you're going to be okay. And then you have 5 minutes to figure out what the signals mean, right? Because some of the activities are so noisy and look so benign. If you can, within 5 minutes, correlate activities to each other, right? Like we saw them enumerate accounts, and then we saw them like reach out to the metadata service or something like that, right? You start putting those dots together in real time, because if we're used to doing it afterward, right? Like we collect logs and collect all this information, and then afterward we process the information, because the attack could take days or weeks, right? In this case, attack takes 10 minutes, so after is like, it's over, like they took the data, right? So if you can detect in 5 seconds, correlate in 5 minutes, and then begin the incident response in 5 more minutes, then you'll be okay. So we're calling that the 555 benchmark for cloud threat detection. And it's based like heavily on this report, and then on basically research we've done with our customers and kind of partners and analyst firms and so on. So it's a completely different world in terms of how we operate. And like you basically are dealing with a heavily automated malicious actor. So you have no choice but to heavily automate yourself, or you are in deep trouble.
Yeah. Without people being directed straight to Sysdig, is there any like basic hygiene that folks can do before they do start exploring products like yours?
Oh, I mean, yeah, there's tons of basic hygiene. I mean, honestly, like I shouldn't recommend Gartner, but honestly, like if you have a Gartner subscription, or if someone in your company does, you should just go read like all of their basic, like how to do that. So there's like guidance frameworks, there's all kinds of like hygiene documents, because a lot of that stuff's been covered by Gartner for years now, and it's a very good resource. You can also find decent resources online, like if you just look through, like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, for example, has a lot of content that you can look at. Cloud Security Alliance has a lot of content. There's a bunch of training available now from like ISACA and SANS and all these other orgs that normally do security training. So like if you asked me, I don't know, 10 plus years ago, I'd have been like, I don't know, no one knows what cloud security is. But now there's actually a lot to get you started. And then I would say once you feel like you have a good understanding of like how identity works in cloud and kind of like how configuration works in cloud, then you can start exploring some of the more complex tools that are kind of like end-to-end, like full cloud application lifecycle security systems, because they're pretty complex. A lot of people just start on one end and then kind of like eventually add more things. But of course, we're more than happy to chat with you, you know, in a complete non-sales engagement. Like if you just want to learn about,
you're probably going to get bombarded now with folks reaching out. But no, I'll put your LinkedIn.
I promise to not tell my sales team we ever spoke.
Exactly. But no, look, Anna, in terms of the space in general, like what's your thoughts around the future? And obviously the threat report, I'll put that in the show notes for folks to look at. But in terms of your perspective, what do you think the future holds?
I think it's going to be super exciting. I mean, we're essentially in a new era of operations, right? So cloud changed a lot of things. Like it made a lot of things easier and faster, which is cool. It creates a bunch of new challenges because now we have to learn how to do that securely, how to do that safely, how to do it cost efficiently. So we're sort of reinventing a lot of things, but we're also inventing a lot of new things, which is really fun. I enjoy kind of ambiguity. So I kind of like to be in a space where there's stuff to figure out, stuff to learn, and stuff to come up with solutions to. So this is like awesome for me. If you're not really into that, then maybe choose a different career path. But I think we've got, I mean, plus with AI now, right? Like we just got decades and decades of hard problems to solve, and that's fun for me. So hopefully it's fun for your listeners.
Love it. Anna, thanks for coming on the show, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you've enjoyed today's show, please like and share with your friends and colleagues, as this is really important for the show's reach. If you'd like to be our next guest or are interested in Aspiron Search's staffing solutions, please get in touch directly with me or reach out to us via our website www.aspironsearch.com.